Here we go. So I just want to double check, can everyone see this okay?
You've just popped. Yeah, that's it. That's on.
Yeah, sorry, I put it up and then popped it down. Sorry, apologies. So just to start with a quick introduction of ourselves. So my name is Florence Smith. I'm a dyslexic, dyspraxic, ADHD and autistic social worker. I'm also a practice educator and look to support neurodivergent student social workers. And I host a blog and podcast which covers neurodivergence in social work.
Yeah, and I'm Deb Solomon, so autistic and ADHD social worker, practice educator and practice development lead, and I'm the chair of the BASWA Neurodivergent Social Workers Special Interest Group, which is the longest title ever. I'll pop some details about that in towards the end.
Perfect, thank you. And just to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at today. So we have kind of split the training into two parts. So first we're going to look at a general discussion about neurodiversity. So what is it? What are the different neurological profiles, looking at the strengths and the challenges, and actually looking a little bit into executive functioning as well, as this is something that can massively impact neurodivergent social workers. And then we're going to look at big picture support ideas. So what can we do to support our neurodivergent social workers? And this is looking at kind of access to work, methods and tools for supervision, and looking at psychological safety and reasonable adjustment passports. So just to get a gauge, we would like you to complete a Menti, which asks the question, what does neurodiversity mean to you? So if you bear with me one moment, you can scan the QR code quickly that is on the screen. That will take you to Menti, and you can just pop in a few words of what that means to you, and then I'll show some of the answers for us to talk through.
So just have a think about, do you use it in your work? Do you know somebody? Are you neurodivergent yourself? Or actually have you not heard the term? Is it something that you're just not really familiar with? It just helps us gauge, doesn't it, where we're at?
Yeah. I will take us to. Okay, so these are some of the responses that we've had so far.
Unique, love that.
Yeah. Different brain process as well. I like that one.
Me.
Lack of support. That is a theme that comes through from some of the neurodivergent social workers that we talk to, but also some of the organisations supporting social workers as well. Individual to everyone, absolutely.
Need more structure.
Yeah.
It's a story of my life.
Respecting difference, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's something that we will champion throughout this training session. Is actually it is a difference, it's not a deficit, and we need to respect and champion difference as much as possible, especially in social work.
Lucy, if you type in menti.com, www.menti.com, and then just type in that code that's at the top there, it should let you onto it.
There was one there that made me chuckle, and then it's moved. Organised chaos. So that is definitely the story of my life.
Misunderstood as well, and I suppose that's the whole point of why we're doing this, is because it is that, it's either not understood at all or misunderstood, isn't it?
Yeah.
For sure. Family life as well, that's interesting, because it is, it doesn't just sit by itself generally, does it?
No, absolutely. Confusing as well. That one kind of pops out to me. It's very confusing, both for people trying to understand it, but also for us ourselves. It can be confusing to figure out what our needs are, but also how to manage some of those needs too.
Yeah.
And also understand some of the unwritten social rules as well.
So there's quite a lot of bits and bobs there, isn't there? It's quite varied understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess what's left to do is actually have a look at what is neurodiversity. So we're going to start with the legal requirement.
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention this because there is a legal requirement to support people who are neurodivergent, and that's the Equality Act that I know we're all familiar with. But I think the thing to mention about this is you have to prove that it is long term and that it has a substantial impact on your life. If you think about the very nature of that, um, you've got to prove to somebody. Oops, sorry, I'm just getting some feedback from somewhere. If you could just make sure that you're on mute. Um, so yeah, I think with the thing with this is you've got to prove that it's substantial, which means you've got to tell somebody that how it impacts you is difficult, the challenges that you've got, how debilitating it is. That's really subjective, and that's where I think a lot of the stigma and the discrimination comes from, because I think you're having to self-advocate from day one. You're having to tell somebody how difficult things are. There's no mention about strengths there. It's very much kind of somebody basically giving time to you to explain how something that they can't see is impacting you. So, yes, there's a legal requirement, and yes, we are supported by legislation, but there is that barrier right at the very beginning that you're having to prove to somebody how it impacts your life. So, I just wanted to kind of mention that because I think there's sometimes this misunderstanding of, well, you've got legislation, so why are you complaining? Actually, it's not quite as easy as that. So that was that bit. And I think if we just move on to the next one, this just, we're talking about what is neurodiversity. So this just, for me, this summed it up really nicely. Ultimately, it's it's the diversity of human beings. We are all different. We all like different stuff. We all, are good at different things and not so good at different things. There's a huge diversity between human minds. And there's lots and lots of things that make us different, including environment, culture, family, history. Um, and it's, ultimately we're all individual. And that's kind of the point of neurodiversity, is acknowledging that we are all individual. We all do things in different ways. We all have different sort of strengths, challenges. Um, I just thought that summed it up quite well. Oh, you're muted, Florence.
There we go. That was absolute magic. I didn't even press a button for that to happen. There we go. Are we back on the screen?
We're back. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I was just saying that's definitely one of my favourite quotes as well, because it's all kind of about acceptance too, acceptance of individuality, human by human too. So just to look at what actually is neurodiversity. So at the top captures it quite well. Sometimes there is a mix up in terms of terminology. So I always start with this. We are all neurodiverse, but few of us are neurodivergent. And often neurodiversity is misunderstood as you are different from me, where one person is neurotypical and the other is not. But what it really stands for, the term neurodiversity, is the acknowledgement of actually human by human, we are different from one another. And it really kind of tries to encapsulate that natural human variation that we have in gender, that we have in sex, that we have in race as well. It's another part of kind of the diversity spectrum that we have as humans. And one interesting fact that always pops up is actually that one in seven of us are neurodivergent in the UK. So when we think the whole of society is neurodiverse, with some of us being neurodivergent, 1 in 7 is quite a high number. So therefore, when we think about our workforce and the people that we work with in social work, it's really important that we understand neurodivergence, neurodiversity, and how to support people as well. So just a bit of an introduction. So as I've said earlier, our brains naturally vary from person to person, and this is normal human variation. So the way that we think, we process and move and communicate varies in a neurodiverse society. That can be for every single person. But there were two people, Judy Singer and Harvey Bloom, that came up with the concept neurodiversity within the late 90s to kind of exemplify the difference in cognitive functioning in humans and actually kind of start to identify and understand some of the neurodivergent brains. So those that kind of divert from the typical way of thinking. And the neurodiversity paradigm equates neurotypes as a valid diversity identity alongside others such as ethnicity and gender. And the movement argues that neuronormal is a social construct and actually there is no right neurodevelopment, rather what society determines to be normal and different. So it's trying to take away some of the stigma from difference and also try and empower us to embrace our full neurodivergent selves as well. So that is a very, very whistle stop tour.
Yeah, so I think for this, when we think about what you see on TV and in the media, I think even what we're taught actually at university, if we're taught about this at all, I just wanted to, if you can put something in the chat, just a quick 2 minute activity, and please don't worry about sort of saying something that you think might be politically incorrect, I guess. But how, at the moment, how does media, how does society kind of tell you that someone is neurodivergent? What do you see? What would you expect to see that would let you know someone is neurodivergent? So if you can just pop something in the chat, we'll just have a couple of minutes doing that. TikTok, yeah. TikTok is a huge movement at the moment, isn't it? So what would you see? What would tell you right now? What would tell you that someone is neurodivergent? Stimming, yeah. Yeah. Think about some of the stereotypes that media shows us as well. Yeah, we've got a few. Stimming. So stimming is kind of it's it's doing something physical which allows you to kind of either focus or self-regulate. It'll be fiddling with something. It could be doing something with your. I mean, I sit and do something with my fingers quite often. That's my stimming. There's lots and lots of different ways, but it's basically self-regulation.
Mine's often joint cracking. If you see me
Yeah.
trying to concentrate, I'm usually clicking my fingers, my neck, or finding something else that I can
Yeah.
make a cool noise with.
Okay. So there's lots and lots of comments. I mean, I think I think we're all being very polite here. But I think quite often what people kind of say is it's that yeah, from TV shows, it's that thing of, oh, someone that likes trains, if it's someone
Yeah.
who has ADHD is someone who's bouncing about, throwing things around, getting into trouble. Someone who's autistic is just going to sit being very monotone and not not look me in the eye and all of that kind of stuff. And I suppose I just wanted to mention that because despite everybody being very, very polite today, there is a stigma. Um, there is a certain kind of image within me in the media of what someone looks like when they're neurodivergent. I don't know about you, Florence, but I personally have been told that I don't look autistic
Yeah,
because I don't have
absolutely.
my big A on my forehead. Like, you don't look autistic.
Hmm.
So it's just understanding that, this is a hidden disability. And because of that stigma and that kind of understanding through the media, it's quite difficult for people to kind of say, actually, yeah, this is me.
Hmm.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next one. So yeah, as we've mentioned, yeah, it's estimated that there's 1 in 7. I suspect actually it's probably more because there's a lot of people who are undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. But that's the sort of the figure that we're going with at the moment. Well, there's a few here that are just under the umbrella. I mean, there's a lot more, but these are the ones that you've probably heard of. I just wanted to mention on here, firstly, acquired neurodiversity. So acquired neurodiversity might be something like a stroke or a brain injury. And there's also mental health here. And again, I wanted to make it very clear that we are not saying that neurodivergent diagnosis is a mental health diagnosis. What we are saying, though, is there are some mental health diagnoses that come under the neurodiversity umbrella. So that might be things like borderline personality disorder, for example. We're not going to go through these individually, but I would suggest just to be curious if you go and research some of these individually. But as you will see in a moment, we're talking about neurodiversity and the overlaps and kind of that when you know someone who is neurodivergent will have lots of these traits. Okay. So I just wanted to mention these statistics as well because I think this is quite interesting because when you think about what we talk about in terms of neurodiversity, most people will go, oh yeah, autism. People know about autism. There's autism strategies that a lot of organizations will have. There's I think that's the one that most people know, but actually when you look down the list, it's quite low down. There are many more people that have, for example, dyspraxia and dyscalculia, and I think that's interesting because actually, what do we talk about those, or do we know about those? Probably not. So again, I just wanted to make that point of it is not just autism because that seems to be the assumption. It's all about autistic people. So these are all you'll see at the very end of the session. There's lots of resources, and all of these are from the individual websites. So Dyslexia UK, for example, is where I've got all of these statistics, but I'm guessing that these vary. And again, it's very difficult to get accurate because of people being misdiagnosed and undiagnosed. So this is just giving you a kind of a rough guide of, the prevalence.
Thank you,
Okay.
Deb. And then when we think about neurodivergence as well, there is often a lot of overlap in the different neurotypes as well. So when I was first diagnosed, I was diagnosed as dyslexic as a teenager, dyspraxic in early adulthood, and then more recently ADHD and autistic. And that was actually through talking to other neurodivergent social workers and also seeing these statistics and thinking, this is why I might relate quite a lot to ADHDers and some of the behaviours and traits that they have. And it gave me permission to actually kind of explore that a bit further. So if we have a little look here, so 1 in 3 people with ADHD have a tic disorder, and 1 in 2 people with dyspraxia have ADHD. And 1 in 4 people with dyslexia have dyspraxia as well. Sorry, DCD is developmental coordination disorder. It's another term for dyspraxia because we like to confuse things sometimes. But when we think about neurodivergence, we've got to think the overlap is the rule, not the exception, and that actually as humans, we are very messy. We don't fit into nice, neat boxes. And this is even more so with neurodivergence as well. And it's so important to consider overlap as well when supporting colleagues and the people that you work with as well, because when we look at these statistics and you're working with someone who say is dyslexic and they are developing kind of demonstrating signs of dyspraxia, then you work with the two because you think 1 in 4 people with dyslexia are dyspraxic, then you kind of work with both, and it's understanding how sometimes they work alongside each other, because I find that my autism and ADHD are in a constant battle with one another. Like my need for routine with my autism is often in a battle with kind of wanting spontaneity with the ADHD and wanting a bit of novelty, and it's trying to find that balance, but understand that actually sometimes with the overlap, some of our colleagues and the people that we work with are in a little bit of a mental battle with themselves that can be somewhat exhausting at times.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and then just to go through some of the strengths and challenges that we might experience. So I'll pick out a few neurotypes here. So with ADHD, some of the kind of typical difficulties that we might experience is like with time management, concentration, attention. This can also be executive functioning, emotional regulation as well. And sometimes our need for spontaneity can definitely be a challenge as well as a strength too, because actually as our strengths, we're creative thinkers, we think visually and we have strong reasoning abilities, we have passion, we have courage, we naturally drive for social justice, and this is something that can really drive us and is actually such a strength within social work, because we're always fighting for what's right, and we use our out of the box thinking styles with problem solving, and the two together can make for kind of great casework, but also great work with our colleagues as well. And we also have this thing where we can hyper focus on something. So if we're really into a task or really into kind of, I really want to solve this problem or learn something new, it often takes a lot to pull us out of that space, and we will kind of negate all of our personal needs, such as standing up, going to the toilet, eating or drinking, to really focus on trying to get to the end of this kind of problem solving or learning session. So these are great strengths of ours. I'm going to go to dyspraxia because that's one that's not always spoken about. So I've pulled out some experiences from being a dyspraxic social worker myself to try and put it into context of what this looks like in practice. So I often have difficulties with driving. We are often driving to different homes, and actually that can pull out a lot of my resources, my internal resources. Self-care can be quite challenging. Organisation can be challenging. Self-esteem as well. Often we are kind of put down, or we hear dog whistles about the way that we practice or the way that we are within a workspace, and this can impact our self-esteem. But also processing time and working memory. Often I can be sat in supervision and asked a question around a piece of casework that I'm doing, and my working memory won't be there. I often need to have written prompts. So sometimes spontaneous supervision can be a bit more of a challenge for me. And the typical thing that you might often hear is difficulties in motor skills as well. So that's spatial awareness and understanding how we are within a space. But some of our strengths are high verbal comprehension. So we're very good at talking about things. We are often out of the box thinkers as well. And kind of some of the skills and strengths that come in with like ADHD as well. So out of the box thinking, creativity, connection, communication can be good as well, and building relationships with people. So again, all of those strengths are things that we need in social work. And actually, if we support neurodivergent people, in this case, kind of dyspraxic and ADHD, to be able to use those strengths and really flourish, you will get some great work, but also you will have a social worker who feels valued, who feels safe, and it's the same with our clients as well. So should we go on to explore a bit of executive functioning? Yes.
Yeah, so executive functioning. I just want to do again. I'm the annoying one that makes you do things. So again, if you could use the chat, and don't think too deeply about this question. I just want your first thought that comes into your head. How many steps do you think there are to having a shower? So how many steps is there involved in that task? If you can just quickly pop a number into the chat, don't think too deeply about it. I'll just give you a second. Yeah. 9 from my bed, yeah. So there's some high numbers coming through and some low numbers. I'm suspecting those people with the higher numbers are possibly more kind of in tune with executive functioning stuff than others. But when you think about this, so executive functioning basically is it's part of the brain, it's the frontal lobe of the brain that controls your executive functioning. and it allows you to kind of do the day-to-day stuff that you need to do. So if you think about having a shower, and I always use that as an example because that's the one that gets me most of the time. When you're having a shower, you've got to initially kind of, right, I'm going to have a shower. I've got to go find my towel. You've also got to maybe find your clothes that you're going to put on afterwards. You've got to go into the bathroom. You've got to turn the shower on. You've got to get the shower, the temperature of the water right. You've got to check you've got shampoo and conditioner. You've got to find your soap. You've got to kind of do those tasks. You can see how this goes on and on and on and on. When your executive functioning isn't functioning, those little individual steps that sound like nothing become very big separate steps. Before you know it, you're sat there with a 25 step or more task to do, and it becomes overwhelming. And when it becomes overwhelming, you can tend to shut down. And the example I normally give with that is when I'm sat and I know I need to be somewhere and I'm late, but I'm still sat in my towel, staring into space because I just literally cannot make my brain decide which bit to do next. Do I pick up my clothes, or do I go into the bathroom, or do I turn the shower on, or do I? And it it sounds like I'm kind of being over dramatic, but it's debilitating. You do shut down and you can't move forward. That's just an example of executive functioning. But if you think about things like planning, for example, if you're going to plan something, you've got to identify those individual bits within your plan. You've got to assign a task to each of those bits. You've got to put them into an order. You've then got to initiate like the start of that. You've also probably got to use your working memory in that to do. So you can see how all of these things can be really, really impaired when your executive functioning isn't doing what it should do. It kind of obviously it's different for everybody, and this is not saying that everyone who is neurodivergent will have these issues, but this is very much a part of it. So when you're thinking about how to support somebody or even yourself, I think it's really important to see how these can impact and kind of adapt that support to these. I know, for example, task initiation, there is some things that I won't start myself. I know that I won't because it doesn't give me the dopamine. It's a very long task. It's going to take a lot of cognitive functioning for that. So I know that there's certain tasks that I need somebody to be a buddy with me to just kind of get me to start it. It's just understanding that and being kind to yourself, I think.
Deb, would you just repeat what you just said? Because I just wanted to hear that again, and it would be really helpful. Would that be all right? Sorry, I know you didn't ask people to
Yeah,
repeat.
no, that's totally fine. Which bit were we?
Well, it was particularly you talked a sequence through there of
the sequence,
and that I got it,
yeah,
and I didn't quite get it. Would that be all right?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I was just saying about, if you're planning something, for example, you've got to look at all the different parts of the bit that you've got to do. You've got to kind of assign a task to each thing. You've got to put it into a sequence or into order. And to do that, you've probably got to hold some working memory to apply previous knowledge to each step of that. So it's kind of understanding that to plan something, prioritize something. It's not just a quick thought process. There's a whole lot of other stuff that you've got to apply to it to make it happen. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I see it, is that you've got to, there's a lot of cognitive function that's got to be applied to just something as simple as planning. And when that frontal part of your brain isn't doing what you need it to do, or isn't running as quickly as you want it to, that can stop at certain points. So putting things into order or applying previous knowledge might just not happen, and that's where it falls apart. So yeah, that was just kind of my explanation of how it can look. But if there's one thing you leave from this session with it, I really would suggest going and researching executive dysfunction, because for me it's the most debilitating thing, isn't it?
I completely agree. And there's a theory called the spoon theory, which I find relates quite a lot to executive functioning. And the idea is that we wake up with a set number of spoons every day. That spoons kind of represents energy. Say we wake up with 10. For a neurodivergent person, waking up and getting out of bed in the morning could use 1 spoon. Having a shower takes up 3 spoons. Brushing our teeth takes up a spoon. Getting breakfast ready could be 2 spoons. Getting lunch ready could be another 3 spoons. And by the time we've actually even got to work, we've used a lot of our executive functioning skills, and we might actually be depleted in terms of energy and spoons before we've then got to go on and, as social workers, do a whole day of kind of prioritizing, of planning, of doing really complex work. So when some of our neurodivergent social workers turn up and they are feeling a little bit disorganized or finding things a little bit harder, it's really important to hold in mind that actually executive functioning before we even get to work can deplete a lot of our energy depending on how many spoons we wake up with that day.
Yeah.
And I think,
and we will talk about ideas for this, won't we, of how to support
yes,
and how to, yeah, we're going to do the tips. That's our second part, Sarah.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we won't kind of scaremonger of, oh no, there's all of these things to think about, and not let you go away with a few ideas of how to work with it.
Yeah.
But I'd actually say one of the spiky profiles is kind of a bit of a tip. So spiky profiles has kind of come about to dispel the spectrum side of things, that you're either one side of a spectrum or the other, and that our needs are on a spectrum. What a spiky profile does is actually look at all of the things that we need day to day, and specifically around work. So you can see on this, it's about attends to detail, manages time, plans, whether they self-organize, they initiate tasks or not, and problem solvers. And what it asks you to do, and this is something as managers that you can do with neurodivergent social workers within supervision, is it asks you to map out what some of the strengths and the challenges are for that social worker. So for example, on this one, managing time, plans, self-organization and problem solving are great strengths for this person, and that's why it comes out in the green. Whereas they actually struggle with finishing tasks, and that's why it's in the red. But their attention to detail and their ability to initiate is somewhat in the middle. So this really helps you as a visual representation of personal and work-related strengths and areas for development. So it's to promote inclusivity rather than exclusivity, and it's a real good visual way and a tool that you can use throughout supervisions as well. So I always say spiky profile mapping isn't a one and done situation. It's something that you do over time, because as neurodivergent people, depending on kind of what's happening in our personal lives and what's happening in our work lives, our needs can change, and they change over time as well. So for example, with ADHD and hormones, they are inexplicably connected. So as a female, my needs can change depending on kind of my hormone cycle, for example. So sometimes I might find initiating tasks really easy, whereas the separate part of that month, it's something that I find really, really hard, because it depends on where my energy levels are. And it's the same with what's happening at home. If there's a lot of demands on me in my personal life, that can make some of these kind of green strengths turn into like a blue or an orange, because actually I don't have the capacity to attend to that at work. So this is something that you can take away as well, but also a great way to think of an individual's needs outside of that kind of old age spectrum that used to be spoken about.
I just wanted to mention the spiky bit as well, in that the reason that it's called spiky is, if you imagine, and I have to start waving my arms for this bit, but if you imagine everybody has things that they're good at, things they're not so good at, and you tend to have a bit of a wave, don't you? When you are neurodivergent, what tends to happen is that we are more likely to highly perform in some areas and struggle in others. So that distance between the things that we're good at and things that we're not so good at tends to be higher, and it's a bit more spiky, a bit more up and down. So that's just kind of explaining where that whole kind of spiky profile terminology comes from, is that, there are things that we're great at, but when we're struggling, we do really struggle with something. And that's kind of where that's came from.
Thank you, Deb.
So we just wanted to mention intersectionality because we're social workers and we should do that with everything we do. And neurodiversity does not, it doesn't pick and choose. It affects everybody. So I just wanted to mention just a couple of things to bear in mind when we're talking about it. So for example, we'll talk about sexuality. There's huge amounts of evidence now. There's lots and lots of studies that have been done that tell us that there is a higher percentage of neurodivergent people within the LGBTQI plus community. That's really important to know, especially within the transgender community. So what we are seeing is happening is there's a lot of people who are having their identities kind of completely ignored when we look at the diagnosis that they've received. There's a lot of people that have said, I am an autistic person, and I am also transgender. And as soon as anybody hears the fact that I am autistic, the transgender side of it is completely erased. It's not important, but actually, it's hugely important to their identity. We really do need to understand and support much better. I think there was a study that said 70% of autistic gender diverse adolescents said they needed medical gender related care, but they were only given support around the autism. There was a study in 2018 that said 32% said their gender identity was questioned because of their autism diagnosis. So this is really important stuff that we need to think about. We've already kind of mentioned gender a little bit, but gender is hugely important as well. If you look back at all of the studies that have been done, if you look at the diagnostic criteria within the manual, most of the studies were done on male subjects, generally adolescents as well. There has been very few studies done with females. So that means that the diagnostic criteria is very much geared towards the male presentation. And we know now that it presents completely differently within genders. ADHD looks very different within male and females. So I think we've kind of got to stop this sort of very pigeonholed idea. So yeah, a lot of the criteria, I mean, I've the amount of times that I've kind of heard things like, well, you can't have ADHD because you're female. I've been told that. And you also can't have it because you're not, really loud and jumping about and doing all this stuff. That again, that's because it looks differently. And as Florence has already mentioned, it is impacted by hormones. There's also something about sort of the I suppose society's kind of roles that we hold. It's always been very much more accepted for males to kind of kind of go out and perhaps have a bit of be a bit raucous, have a bit of a fight, be a bit, guys being guys. Women, it's not really acceptable to do that. Women, are seen very differently in their roles in society. So we tend to internalize much more and mask a lot more. And so there's been a lot of women recently that have either been misdiagnosed or are coming out with late diagnosis, probably having misdiagnosed with either depression or anxiety or whatever that external sign is that you see. I just mentioned culture as well, because culture is a huge thing. Again, there is a lot of stigma, a lot of discrimination with diagnosis. We know that people of colour are not being diagnosed. We know that I was talking to a lady who I think she was early 20s. She had just been diagnosed with autism, but she'd had to really fight for that diagnosis. And when we talked about why that was, she said it was basically because the doctor had seen that she is a black female. She was quite blunt. She could be quite loud. She didn't always regulate the volume of her voice. She had the kind of emotional dysregulation thing going on sometimes. So she used to get quite upset or, quite angry about stuff. It was seen as, and this is in her words, I was just a young black aggressive female because that's what they're all like. That's what she was told by the professionals. And so she missed that diagnosis for quite a while. Internalizing symptoms means it's that thing of we hold it inside us. So rather than kind of getting angry and aggressive or you know, that very outwardly seen kind of reaction, we tend to hold it in, go within ourselves. You'll probably see sort of that depression signs. I tend to go non-verbal at times. I very much sort of hide in my room. It's that kind of stuff. And then I just wanted to mention again with culture that there's, there are some areas of the world, some cultures that they literally don't even have a word for autism. That doesn't exist. So when you've got people that are kind of showing these traits, there's no name for it. There's no understanding for it. They are just seen as the naughty kid or something like that. And there are some communities where things like eye contact is actually really discouraged. It's something that children don't do with adults because it's really disrespectful. So therefore, you might be missing lots of the traits that maybe would be picked up in our society, because it's actually not culturally acceptable. So you're missing those times for diagnosis. And then the last, I just mentioned age very, very quickly. I know that I've changed throughout my life, and the older that I've got, I think the more traits have come out. But it's important to mention things like menopause. So menopause, I know, I read a study that in the US, if you show traits of, for example, ADHD over the age of 55, generally you will get, they'll say that you're starting menopause. Because it's there's very similar traits. It feels very similar. So a lot of women were really having to fight to kind of say, no, I really want to explore this, really want to have a look and see if this is what's going on. And it does change with age. I was told once through my local authority that you grow out of ADHD. Actually, what you do is you develop strategies to cope with it as you get older. You don't grow out of it. Your brain doesn't rewire itself. Be amazing if it did, but it doesn't. You just you get strategies, you get, you have to. But you certainly don't grow out of it. So yeah, there's just literally just a few things to mention about intersectionality, but it's just really important that you don't, again, we don't put people into boxes. People have a lot of stuff that's going on in their life, lots of things that make them them. And if we're going to support people, you've got to look at all of this together.
And I just want to pull out as well in the gender side of things. I know you mentioned earlier that there are kind of gender roles within society, how females are meant to present and how males are meant to present. Often it can also be difficult to kind of identify neurodivergence in yourself as a female or within a female colleague, because we often do something called masking. So that's actually when we try and hide some of our traits and some of our differences, because actually we either think that actually that's not how a female is meant to present, or we've learned that actually some of these behaviors and traits aren't acceptable because we've had kind of microaggressions, or we've been invalidated when we have shown these. And this is something that's really important, again, for understanding how to support your colleagues, because if you do have a colleague who's neurodivergent and hasn't yet disclosed it or doesn't yet know it, there will be a lot of masking there. And again, that takes up a lot of energy, and it really impacts our self-esteem and can impact mental health, because really what we're telling ourselves is actually the way that we are doesn't fit in with society or within this culture. So I need to push down and suppress who I am as a person. And that's such a horrible, horrible thing to do to ourselves, because we should be celebrating our difference and kind of celebrating our uniqueness. But everything we've been told is that actually difference is not okay. And that kind of leads on to kind of internal ableism quite nicely, because actually sometimes it is a bit of internal ableism that we feel when we say like, oh, we shouldn't do this or we can't do this, because it's not normal, when actually what is normal but a construct within society. Deb, I can't remember who had this slide.
It was me, but that's fine.
Sorry, do go ahead. Sorry.
Totally fine. You were running with it then. Yeah, I just wanted to mention this because I think quite often we're our own worst enemies. But there's a study that that was done that said that I think by the age of 12, a neurodivergent child has heard 20,000 more corrective comments or criticisms than a neurotypical child. So just if you just kind of think about that, you've been told probably most of your life to, you know, sit still or calm down or don't answer back or don't interrupt or why can't you? That all very much forms part of your identity. And you get to a point where I think you you do internalize that. You do kind of you start. I mean, I apologize for stuff, but as soon as I walk in a room, I haven't even spoken yet, but I'll still apologize because I'm assumed I've done something wrong, probably. But there's lots of things that are said to you that do that. So, the amount of times that people kind of say, oh yeah, have you tried an alarm? Or, have you tried to get a diary? Just try and focus a bit harder. What that does is make me think, oh, you know, maybe it is just me. Maybe I am just scatty or disorganized, or maybe I'm just not trying hard enough because clearly everybody else thinks that. What that does is it kind of it leads to that self-criticism, it leads to that kind of self-doubt, it leads to that lack of self-esteem, and that's when that masking really comes out because you start to think, right, okay, clearly I can't show that, clearly I've got to try and be more whatever it is you've been told. And that creates shame, and I think when shame happens, that's really, really hard to overcome because within you feel not good enough. I always say it's that word should that with me, I should be able to do this. I should be able to turn up on time. I should be able to do small talk. I should be able to sit in this room where the lights are really, really bright and that clock's ticking and it smells weird and my chair's not against the wall and I feel really uncomfortable. But I should just put up with that. That's okay. But actually what that does is when I leave at the end of the day, I'm exhausted and yeah, spoons are gone and I'm non-verbal and it's too much. So what we need to kind of do is stop sending these messages. Again, I've had people say stuff like, "Oh, I'm really sorry," when okay, or but you've been to university, how can you be? All of these little things just make you doubt yourself all the time. So please be careful when you're talking to people. And yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's an excuse. You're just being, it's so important to recognize that we are having all of these conversations with ourselves before you've even thought about it. We're already saying, oh, why can't you just get your stuff ready in time in the morning? Why can't you just we've had that. So yeah, just be careful what you might think you have good intentions when you're kind of saying, oh, it's okay, you don't look autistic. That becomes something that we internalize and it kind of changes how we feel about ourselves. So
Absolutely.
another activity on the next slide.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
That's all right. Bearing in mind all of this stuff that we've just talked about, and again, just super quickly in the chat, because I know we need to rush on time, but what might stop somebody from talking about their challenges or diagnosis? So just pop it into the chat. What might be a barrier? I'll just give you a second to do that. Yeah, fear of judgment, definitely. Yeah. 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 So while you're writing this, I'm just going to mention a study that we did within our neurodivergent social workers group. And we asked people how psychologically safe they felt to seek support. And over 60% said, yeah, no, we do not feel safe to ask for support. So, and I think that's a that's a really high number of people that literally said, I do not feel safe to ask for support in the workplace. So all of these things that you guys are writing in, which, yeah, absolutely is all stuff that I've heard within the group and all stuff that I felt myself. All of that is kind of impacting people's ability to kind of say, do you know what? If you need this work from me, I'm going to need this. And yeah, overthinking is just the worst, because literally someone will say hello to me and I can spend the next 2 hours analysing whether they've said it in a particular way or whether they've done this or whether they meant that, or actually, and I catastrophize it all, and it's exhausting.
Absolutely.
But if we just go, yeah, so you've all come up with, yeah, um, brilliant, thank you. You've all come up with some really good ideas, but this, yeah, I think this is probably most of those. You might not recognise it. You know, before I was diagnosed, I was only diagnosed in 2020, and before that, I just thought it was me. I just thought that I was
Yeah.
just a bit slow, just a bit scatty, just a bit disorganised, just a bit weird,
Just a bit too much.
just a bit, just everything. But it is fear. It is risk to placement if you're a student or to your job. Again, I've been told when I went for progression, or don't mention it, don't talk about it, don't let anyone know. You'll be all right if you don't let anyone know. Interesting, in that moment I just thought, no, I'm not going to do that, and I did talk about it, and the group manager kind of said, oh, it's really refreshing for someone to come along and just be real, and she really appreciated it, but it's really hard. So yeah, see, these are some of the things, and the only way that we can change that is by talking about this, but having sessions like this, by creating that safe space. So we'll move on because I know we're running slow on time.
Absolutely. And I just want to highlight as well that there are traits from us that can be taken advantage of. Sometimes these are kind of not explicit. You're not explicitly deciding to take advantage of these traits, but for example, we can often find it difficult to say no. So this can often mean that we're taking on more work because we don't want to feel uncomfortable saying no at the fear of being perceived as not being able to cope with things. But also we fear saying no because sometimes there's an assumption that it's a failure on our part to kind of take on too much work. So in that sense, when there isn't a psychologically safe environment, we feel like we can't say no because we will be judged in terms of our capacity to practice as a social worker. But also once we say, actually, I feel like I've got too much work, we're then judged for not being able to say no as well. So we'll talk a bit about psychological safety because that's really important in terms of us being able to assert ourselves. Again, with masking, I would say don't always assume someone is okay. We can put on a mask and say, like, yeah, I'm good today, because we might not know how to communicate that actually we're finding something challenging, or because through our previous lived experience, we've been told that actually being open and honest is not okay. And often it can feel or seem like we're managing, however, we are struggling. We've said about this overthinking, especially I find myself, I live a lot of my world in my head. So I can feel like I'm not managing, I'm struggling, but everyone around me seems to think, yeah, Florence is doing absolutely fine. And that was something I experienced years ago in my ASYE. I approached my line manager and then principal social worker to say, actually, I'm really struggling. And they were like, no, you're doing absolutely fine. And it was like, no, I'm telling you I'm struggling. And they're thinking, well, she's getting all the work done, there's no issues in her practice, so she's okay. Not really thinking about kind of everything that I'm doing to make sure that that is happening. And that was actually kind of depleting all of my energy. And again, pair this with people pleasing. We are often trying to please people because we need that acceptance, because we've been told our whole life that difference is not okay, and we need that kind of, we need to feel like we belong. Belonging is a massive thing, and connection is a massive thing. So we might feel sometimes if we say no, it breaks that belonging, it breaks that connection, and it kind of ruins that people pleasing. And again, resilience is a massive thing. I was recently catching up with some of my old work colleagues, and they were talking about the resilience of social workers and how it's changing. And I actually think that this can be weaponized, being told that actually we need to be put up with stuff, or things can be a deficit in our self-care, when actually we are extremely resilient to get to the place that we are now. We are often navigating workspaces and education to become a social worker in institutions that aren't built up for us. So to question resilience is questionable itself, but I will try not to get on that high horse and move on to part two, which is one of the key parts of actually how can we support neurodivergent social workers.
Yeah, and we just wanted this in here because I heard someone say it. It was during Neurodiversity Celebration Week in March this year. And Marcia she just said neurodivergent people encounter problems but are not the problem, and it just really hit me. Kind of we feel so much that we're the problem. When we ask for reasonable adjustments, it's like, oh, they're asking for stuff, you're the problem. Actually, we are not the problem. We just encounter problems within a society that isn't geared towards difference. So I just really liked that because it kind of made me flip how I see myself, I think.
Absolutely. And I'll only briefly go through this, but I kind of like this one, which is we are valuable because we are humans. So there's a growing belief that actually neurodivergent people are valuable because of our superpowers. And actually that kind of negates a lot of our challenges, and that actually we deserve space because we are humans. Everyone deserves space. We shouldn't have to justify that as an autistic ADHD social worker. I need to give you reasons to let me be a social worker in this space. Actually, I deserve to be a social worker because I've qualified as a social worker and I have a passion for social work and helping people. So sometimes this superpowers label can really, and kind of justifying our spaces through these superpowers can really undermine it. And a final one, we don't have an instruction manual, which is probably the worst thing that you guys want to hear right now. So unfortunately, I mean, when I had my assessment, I thought, oh, they're going to break down all of my strengths, all of my challenges, so I can present this nice and neatly to my manager and be like, this is a recipe of how you work with me. But we don't have an instruction manual. We slowly over time develop an understanding of what our needs are. And again, this changes over time. So work with us to understand what our strengths and our challenges are. And this is a kind of continual piece of work that you'll do with us.
So I'm going to go super quick through the SMILE model because, again, I know that we're running a little bit past the time that we wanted to be at this point. Not like us to be talking over time. So I created the SMILE model. I initially created this for supporting practice educators to better support neurodivergent students, but I think this can be applied to anyone really that's either working with someone who is neurodivergent within your team, within the community. So the first part of the SMILE model is safety. You can just go to the next, thank you. Yeah, so psychological safety, we've kind of mentioned this already, but ultimately it's about feeling part of something, feeling included, feeling safe to learn, safe to contribute, and safe to ask questions and challenge without that fear. And the question I suppose we all need to be asking is, how do we create that psychologically safe space? So it's referring to a work environment that's got that trust and that mutual respect. People should be able to feel comfortable to be themselves, and shouldn't be sort of embarrassed or worried about that. Thank you, Florence.
That's okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of being, yeah, it's being visible, it's being aware of those biases that we might have, like we were talking about those little things that we might say that we think help but really don't help. It's just ultimately it's talking to people to allow them to be able to say, as I mentioned earlier, if you want me to do this, I need this from you, or I need this to work at my best. It's having that space that you can say that and you can do that. So with me, for example, in supervision, I think again you mentioned this earlier, Florence, in supervision, I will often say, can you give me a vague idea of what we're going to be talking about in supervision so I can prepare? And if you're going to ask me about a case, you just need to give me a second because I need to just pull that information out. But I need to feel safe to say that without feeling like, oh, you don't know your cases. It's being able to feel safe, and the only way that you can do that is to spend time understanding what this looks like, what that support looks like, and actually talking to someone. I know that sounds really simple, but actually talking to the person and finding out what they need. So the next one in the SMILE model is maximize. And this just means kind of maximize the ability, maximize those strengths, maximize that safety. And it's things like your workspace. So it's looking at what does that workspace look like. I know there's things we can't change, and I know that a lot of social work buildings are sort of generally sort of horrible crumbling buildings with horrible fluorescent lights and stuff. But it might be things like so I like to sit with my back against a wall. I don't like sitting with my back open to the back of it just makes me feel really uncomfortable and really weird. It might be allowing somebody to have a lamp on their desk so they control the lighting where they're sitting. It might be checking that they're not sat in the area where people are walking through to the kitchen and there's loads of weird smells. It might be making sure that there's a quiet area that you can go and work if you're really needing to focus and concentrate. It might be changing the workplace culture to make it okay to wear headphones. I'm not quite sure why that's such a difficult thing, but people seem to really not like someone having headphones on. But actually, for a lot of people, having headphones on, whether that's just to block the noise or to listen to music or something, that's how they focus. I don't know where it came from that that's not a professional way to be, but it's just understanding these differences. It might be things like resources that you've got within the workplace. So making sure that you've got lots of information, lots of resources that are going to help you understand how to get the best out of people. Assistive technology, don't assume that because someone's been given Dragon on their laptop, that's it, they're sorted, they're fixed. Because that's not always the way. Something might only work for a short amount of time and not others, but also a lot of the reasonable adjustments that we ask for probably don't cost a thing. Reasonable adjustments for me are things like sending me something in writing after we've had a meeting, or if you're going to send me stuff, make sure that it's in bullet points. Dragon's just a program that you have on your laptop. It's a read and write program. A lot of dyslexic people tend to use it. But yeah, assist other sort of reasonable adjustments might be things like having kind of noise cancelling headphones, or being able to go and sit somewhere quiet when I need to focus, or it might be kind of being given the context for stuff, that kind of thing. If you're going to maximize people's support, you also need to know what you need to change. There's very much a thing about we're expected to explain what we need and we kind of how we can fit that into the workplace, but actually you guys need to change too. Managers need to change too. Everyone, we all need to kind of change how we approach difference. It's not just one-sided. The next one for SMILE is involve, and I know this seems fairly simple, but lots of decisions are made without actually talking to us. And yeah, a learning plan or a working plan, just do that together. So kind of in a supervision, if you're talking to somebody or if you're talking to somebody within your team, okay, how do we get you to this point? What would help you with your work? What would help you planning your work? That kind of thing. Looking at boundaries and reviewing things as well. Don't just kind of do something and then leave it. You've got to keep coming back to it all the time. Say, is this still working for you? Or do we need to look at it? Things like energy accounting. Florence was mentioning earlier about the spoons and how quite often that energy can be completely depleted. And we just need to understand. So for me, again, I can have a couple of days where I'll probably do 5 days work in 2 days because I'm on it and I'm focusing. I might have another day where I do very little because my executive functioning is just not there. The work will get done. It just might not get done in your conventional 9 to 5. And it's understanding that. And it's things like breaks. Sometimes, I forget that I need to like stand up and eat and drink and stuff. And I just sometimes have an accountability buddy that might just message me going, hey, lunchtime. And it's all I need just to kind of reset and think. So the L in SMILE is learn, So it's taking time to understand. So get people involved. So hold sessions like this. And again, this is geared towards students, but actually this can be towards your peers, towards people you're working with. Think about your own traits and biases. So do you like things done in a particular way? Because we all have traits of kind of preferences of how we work. Have you got things that you kind of, right, I like stuff to be done this way, and is that impacting how you work with someone else? And do you maybe need to kind of look at those as well? And then the last one is evolve. And I think this is probably the most important, that don't just do things kind of like talking to somebody or attend some training like this and kind of go, right, sorted. What are you going to do with it now? What are you going to do next? Do you have any spaces where you work? Have you kind of done that bit of research? Have you attended any training? Have you made sure that you've looked at sort of sensory factors within your office? What are you going to do with it next? So that's kind of the SMILE model. I'm going to move on to supervision for Florence.
Thank you.
We're superly rushing through this last bit now, aren't we?
And these are things that you can take away as well. And hopefully we'll have time for questions anyway. But supervision is another thing in social work that is based on neurotypical or neuronormative thinking and ways of behaving. So myself and another neurodivergent social worker came up with this supervision model because we found that actually supervision is a test of our working memory. It's testing how we put complex ideas into words. It forces us to put complex and abstract ideas into words fast as well. So being able to kind of put what we've got in a messy scribble in our head out in a way that someone else understands. And also there are unwritten social dynamics. There's a power imbalance. It can cause sensory overwhelm depending on the space, and also emotional overwhelm as well, if we think in terms of emotional regulation and rejection sensitivity. So it can put a lot of pressure on us to perform how we think you want us to perform. So often there's a lot going on in our head in terms of what do we need to talk about. We're trying to prioritize, so our executive functioning is going on there. We're trying to socialize in that as well, so that's social communication. And then we're also trying to figure out, oh my gosh, how on earth do I present within this space? So we formed this model of supervision looking at embedding neuroinclusion and discussions about how we're finding work with our personal kind of supervision. And this could be used to reflect on learning, but also how we're managing managing the workspace. So it's based off of the assessment triangle. So what we look at is kind of personal things. So in the very first supervision, it could be looking at actually what is your neurological profile, what's your diagnosis, over time looking at individual strengths, challenges, sensory needs, looking at an individual's work-life balance, what do they need, because really that is our executive functioning. What time do we need to replenish our spoon and our energies? What mental health comes alongside this in terms of like self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and also what are our individual learning styles as well. And then we can look at what is the professional impact of all of this. So if we've said executive functioning is something that we find challenging, okay, so what can we do to help with time management? What different ways of working, such as adaptations to the office, can we put in place? Personal impact might be identifying if they're an ADHDer. One of their strengths might be thinking outside of the box. Dyslexic people are exceptional relationship builders. That's why they make great salespeople. And I often say that's what can make us great at kind of selling a support plan sometimes, or selling different ideas and ways of working. So listing all of the professional impacts of those challenges, of those strengths, of those needs. And then we look at actually what resources can we put in place. So does there need to be an adapted induction period? Do we need to support someone to apply to access to work? And what access to work is, it's funded by the part funded by the government, part funded by the organisation, depending on the size, and it gives you access to kind of paid reasonable adjustments. So you can get things like ADHD coaching, you can get headphones paid for, some people have personal assistants paid for. The assistive technology that we've spoken about can be paid for through that, and it is something that you can apply for online or over the phone. But it is I wouldn't say it's the most accessible thing to go through. So my advice to make your practice really neuro inclusive is don't just suggest apply to Access to Work and let someone go on their way. It's supporting them through that application process and actually understanding that it could take 2 or 3 weeks to apply, because they want you to outline how your neurodivergence or your disability impacts your work. What are your strengths? What are your challenges? And actually that might need to be a collaborative process to identify some of those. So that's a quick overview of Access to Work. So some other resources that we might put in place are kind of sensory or quiet spaces. There might be kind of personal resources for an individual. There's management there. So this can be resources in terms of training, like we're at today. And training on neurological profiles, on psychological safety, on specifics of like autism and ADHD, and again, that kind of digital assisted technology. And this is a model that can be used throughout all supervisions when we're doing that personal side of things, and is something that can be when we look at the personal, as I said earlier, our needs change over time. So it's something that can always be revised. And it's just a good way to check in and make sure that you are meeting the needs of your social worker. So that was a whistle-stop tour.
So yeah, and we mentioned in that one of the things that you can do is adapt induction periods or learning agreements for students. And again, I think this really applies to anyone. Actually, it's looking at things like processing needs. So yeah, extra time to kind of consider feedback, ask questions. So like we said, rather than kind of asking a question about a case, for example, and expecting that answer to be there immediately. It's just giving that thing of, even just an email saying, oh, I'm just going to pop over in a couple of minutes to talk about this particular thing. Just gives that processing time to kind of go, okay, now I need to move my brain from here to over here because that's what we're doing now. Just acknowledging that if someone just takes that little bit longer to kind of pull that information, that doesn't signify a lack of ability or a lack a capability concern. It's just kind of how the brain is processing that information. We talked a lot about executive functioning earlier, so it's things like having that flexible schedule. It's having different sort of systems that work. So my Outlook calendar is the most colourful thing you've ever seen, because it's how I kind of do, and I literally will have everything in there, from like having a break and lunch to my to-do list to everything, because that's how I then prioritize and order things, and I'll do that at the end of the day, ready for the next day, so that I'm kind of not having to think about that. Written instructions, that kind of thing as well. Yeah, concentration. So it's having things like flowcharts sometimes, or visual things when you're talking about work processes or cases, just different ways to engage somebody's brain. I see better in sort of flowcharts and pictures and stuff, so quite often when I'm going through cases I will draw it out. We love things like genograms and stuff, don't we? So why can't we do that with our work? Let's just have a picture. We like pictures. I'm not going to go through all of these because I want to have time for questions, but ultimately it's about adapting and talking to the person and finding out what's going to help. We talked about noise. We talked about light. It's making sure there's spaces that people can go to. It's giving somebody time, again, in terms of talking through what they need, having those flexible schedules, just understanding. So I think we'll move to the last bit, Florence, so we've got time for questions.
Yep, so this is just a really, really quick one. There's a thing called a reasonable adjustment passport. And again, this is something that you can work with yourself, ideally with a manager, to look at actually what is your needs. And as you can see here, the purpose is to make sure that everyone's clear and has a record of your adjustments, so then you can hold your workplace to account, but also to reduce the need to assess adjustments every time you change jobs. So often I found in local authority social work, I've kind of moved roles or moved teams, but my adjustments don't always move with me. So this was a way of actually making sure that an understanding of my needs and adjustments moved with me. And it all asks about kind of adjustment details. So what are the barriers within and or outside the workplace? And what's the actual impact at work? And then within that, you outline what adjustments have been agreed by the employer, and whether these are working or not. And also it kind of makes you look at what does a good day at work look like, and what does it look like when things are challenging. And this is good for employers and managers to be able to spot well, this is going to be one for me, to spot actually when Florence is getting her words mixed up, or can't get some words out of her mouth. That might mean that she's a bit tired and that her spoon levels are a bit low. So maybe we need to look at implementing some of these reasonable adjustments, for example. So that's a very brief look at a reasonable adjustment passport, and it is quite self-explanatory, and there are quite a few good examples online with questions that you can ask to help you fill these in as well. So we move on to what, so what, and now what? So now that you know a little bit about neurodiversity, we know why it's important to understand. What are you going to do to ensure that you are providing the most inclusive experience for your social workers, or for yourself, or for your colleagues?
So we ask you to kind of this is a point where you can ask questions, but also make a bit of a pledge. I think it's really easy to attend training like this and kind of go, right, yeah, I've got that, and then kind of go off about your day. But actually, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to take away from this? What are you going to apply to how you work with people? So it's really good sometimes to just make a bit of a pledge to yourself what you're going to do now. It's that difference between kind of almost like being non-oppressive and anti-oppressive. It's okay, or non-ableist and anti-ableist. Kind of, it's okay to be aware, but actually you've got to be active. What are you going to do? So time for questions, or I either ask questions, or if you want to pop in the chat about a pledge that you're going to do or something you're going to take away.